Hello, and welcome to The Connection. This podcast is about understanding and building the connection we have with others and with ourselves. I hope that through this podcast, you will learn to have more joy and fulfillment in your life. I'm your host, Jared Hurst, and this is episode number 4, Emotional Processing. I say emotional processing, but you might know it as emotional regulation. The reason I like to call it emotional processing instead of emotional regulation is because I feel that the word regulation makes it sound like we're supposed to control our emotions. But the reality is, with emotions, I believe it's more of a partnership. So I'm going to use the phrase emotional regulation a lot today, but what I'm meaning is my term, which is emotional processing. Before I get into this, in my opinion, emotional processing is one of the most important things we can learn in order to create more joy in our life, in order to give us a better life, that we are able to create our situation and our life. A lot of us are at the mercy of our emotions. We feel good, we feel bad. It's all a result of whatever happens to us. And that's the end of it. If good things happen, we feel good. If bad things happen, we feel bad. And that's what happens. I found that emotional processing, emotional regulation, was so important to me changing my life, because I have been very much an emotional roller coaster. I am still a very strong emotional man. But learning this process has helped me to get to the point where I can enjoy the roller coaster and have a little more control over how that ride looks. It definitely is one of the most important things I've learned in my life, and I was really tempted to have this be my very first episode. So I hope it will help you as much as it's helped me. Before I get into my process, the process that I have is one that I've created, because when I first got into this, I realized that there weren't a lot of resources that I felt really helped me understand how to emotionally regulate. There's tons of literature that I would read or hear that made me believe that emotional regulation was incredibly important. But when I would read or listen to it, I didn't feel like it really helped me understand how to do it. So what I've done is, over the years, I've taken all the different things that I've learned and some of my own philosophies, and I've created a process that works for me. I am a very analytical person. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about each step, and I'm going to try and explain it in a way so that hopefully you can wrap your head around each step and why it's important. But I promise at the end, I'm going to make it short, succinct, and easy to understand. Before I go into this process, I'm going to give you an example of an emotional situation for me, so that way I can relate each step to that emotional situation, and hopefully that will make it so it makes more sense with that example being linked to each step. For me, romantic relationships, romantic rejection is incredibly painful, and just the whole process of dating has been, in my past, a very volatile emotional experience. I have worked so much on myself, and it has become a much easier ride. A lot of that has to do with feelings of abandonment and rejection and self-image. If you happen to know about what they call attachment styles, I was what's called an anxious attachment style. So every time I started to feel a loss of connection in any type of relationship, I immediately tried to hold on to that relationship as tight as I could to keep it from running away from me. I believe in a lot of ways that was created by my identity, and then also and of course my identity was created by certain influences in my early life. I was adopted. I think it makes a lot of sense that as a little kid, your nervous system can tell that you've been taken away from your mother. Even if you have this incredibly loving family that you're given to, I think your nervous system recognizes that. And so I would be very fascinated to see a study on attachment styles and adoption. I would wager that a lot of children that have been adopted have either an anxious or an avoidant attachment style. Anyway, I digress. Because of that, because of getting bullied as a kid, because of my adoption, because of a number of influences, I developed an identity where rejection is one of my hardest emotions. And so that's the one that I want to go about in this situation. So let's pretend for a moment that I've been dating somebody for a little while, we'll say 2-3 dates, and that person tells me that they're no longer interested in dating. The first thing after they say that is I immediately start to feel a set of emotions. I might feel hurt, angry, sad, etc. The first step in emotional processing is to stop the emotion before it becomes overwhelming and something that you can't deal with. When we're incredibly sad, when we're incredibly angry, whatever, it can be very difficult to deal with that emotion. And this idea of stopping or pausing your emotion is not something new just to me. I actually thought I created it at one point. And then I started reading all these things and found out that it is very common. It's talked about quite a bit. The idea of choosing a response to a stimulus. Brené Brown talks about the space between the stimulus and the response and choosing our response. But for me, I didn't know that that was something that everybody talked about. And so I learned that the best thing I could do is before my emotion got too big, I wanted to pause it. The ways that I found to do that, I believe, I haven't personally done it, but I believe meditation can be a really good way to help you reach into a centered space and calm your nervous system when all of a sudden you feel yourself being activated. I have found that for me, I will say in my head, or even when I was really new at this skill, I would say out loud, I would say stop or no. And I would just kind of stop myself from delving into that emotion. I also found for me that as I started doing cold exposure, that was incredibly helpful for me. That same ability that allows you to get into a really cold tub of water and ice and settle your nervous system down can be incredibly helpful when it comes to stopping your emotions before they get too overwhelming. I want to make this really clear. I am not saying that you repress your emotions. I'm just saying you put them on hold temporarily. You're just going to hold on to them temporarily so that you can study them. So the second step after stopping the emotion or pausing the emotion is seeking to understand the emotion. And the reason why it's important to seek to understand the emotion, there's a lot of different reasons, but one of the main reasons why we want to understand those is because sometimes with understanding comes resolution. And I'll come back to that in a moment. So the first thing I do is I stop, pause the emotion. Then I go to understand. I say, well, what am I feeling? I label it. Okay, I'm hurt. I'm angry. I'm sad because this person just told me they don't want to be with me anymore. What caused it? Well, typically it's going to be a person or it's going to be a situation. So in this case, it's going to be a person. And then why did the actions of that person caused me to feel this way? A lot of people, what happens is they look for something outside of themselves. They say, this situation or this person made me feel this way. And then their solution is we change the situation or the person. You did this bad thing. You're completely at fault. You need to stop making me feel this way. And what needs to come after understanding where that emotion came from is some introspection. We need to start looking at ourselves and saying, well, why did this situation, this action make me feel this way? So in this case, when this person rejects me, they say that they don't want to continue a relationship with me. The reason that I personally might feel that way, I start looking at my identity, I start looking at my beliefs, and it would be things like, well, they don't want me because I'm unattractive. There's something wrong with me. I'm not lovable. I don't deserve to be loved. Those are some thoughts that might come into my mind if I'm really digging in and looking at why I'm feeling that way. I think the reason that's so important is, like I said, when you understand your emotions, a lot of times they resolve. So if I were to look at those in that specific situation, I might ask myself, well, is that true? The reasons that the story that I have behind why I'm feeling these emotions is because that I'm unattractive or I'm not lovable, I don't deserve love. Well, are those things true? At first, when I would ask myself that, it was really hard for me to say no. I knew logically, based on things that I'd read and different things about self-esteem, that I should know that I'm attractive. I should know that I'm lovable. I should know that I deserve to be loved. I should know that there isn't something wrong with me. But at times, it was really hard for me to believe that. With other things, it's really easy for me to realize that the story I'm telling myself is inaccurate. For example, I have an issue around, and I'm going to talk about this later, but I have an issue around when people interrupt me or I feel like they weren't paying attention during a conversation. When somebody does that, I have a belief that I'm not interesting. And so when that person interrupts me or doesn't pay attention, it hits at that wound. It hits at that belief that I'm not interesting. And a lot of the times that causes anger for me. What I've done with anger a lot of the times is when I start analyzing that and I say, is the reason that they interrupted me or didn't hear me because they don't think I'm interesting? And I look at it, I'm like, no, I know this person. I know that they didn't have any ill meaning behind their action. And what's interesting is as soon as I analyze and understand why I'm feeling that way, a lot of the times it just goes away because I realize it's based on a false belief. That isn't repressing an emotion. It's literally the emotion resolves itself because of understanding. The other thing that can be really helpful is to understand the actions of the person. The more you become aware of how your identity and your belief system drives your actions, your emotions, the things you say, etc., the more you start to become aware of how other people's identity and beliefs is driving their ship. And when I start looking at somebody and I start saying, well, is this about me or is this about them? I start to realize a lot of the times that where it's about them, where their belief system's coming in. I've had a couple of relationships where somebody left me and I realized that the reason is because, or at least part of the reason, is because they had what's called an avoidant attachment style. When they get close to somebody, it gets scary. Intimacy is scary for them because that means they're vulnerable and they have a chance to be hurt. And so I know that I've had people that have left my life, at least in part, because it became too scary for them to stay in that relationship with me. And as I become aware of their actions and their beliefs that are causing by their identity and their belief system, then all of a sudden that emotion either dissipates and resolves itself, or it lessens and it becomes something more manageable because I'm starting to understand the truth behind that emotion. Because really, emotions are caused by our interpretation of a series of events. Our mind has no idea how to interpret something until we give it an interpretation. So that's why you want to understand after you've paused it. If that resolves everything, great, you're done. I found with a lot of not intense emotion, but lesser emotions, just understanding and awareness helps me deal with them, and I'm great. If that doesn't resolve everything, then there are 2 steps that you do simultaneously. I'll talk about the first one, talk about the second, but they're done at the same time. My belief, and this has helped me so much as I've learned to realize this, is that our emotions are there for a purpose. They are our mind's way of protecting us and keeping us safe. So as I start to look at each emotion, I have actually found that every emotion has a purpose in order to protect us. And instead of fighting the purpose of that emotion, if I work with that emotion, it resolves significantly faster. I don't want to repress it. I don't want to hold it at bay. I want to feel that emotion. I want to experience that emotion, and I want to work with it. So I'm going to give you some examples of how you would work, what a purpose of an emotion would be, and how you can work with it. So anger. I talked about how being interrupted during a conversation or ignored can make me feel angry. I actually think it has a lot to do with the fact that I am an absolute chatterbox. And so I've had times where people don't listen to me. I can tell that they're ignoring me. And I've developed a belief that on some level I'm not interesting. So when people do that, it hits at that wound. My response a lot of the times is anger. If you look at anger is a fight response. Like anger is, I'm being attacked by a bear and I feel that I can actually fight the bear, so I'm going to get angry and I'm going to fight it and I'm going to defend myself. I'm going to protect myself against a threat. Usually our mind, it does one of 2 things. It either looks at something and says this is something that I can fight, or this is something that I can't fight, so I'm going to flee or I'm going to freeze. So like if it's a big bear, maybe I'll fall to the ground and cover myself and just pretend to be dead and hope that it doesn't kill me. I might, if it's something I think I can outrun, I'm going to run away from it. But if I feel like I can fight it and that's the best option, then I'm going to attack it. And that's a lot of the times what we do with anger is somebody threatens us in some way, and so we attack them. Well, what's my belief around anger in this specific situation? Is like, well, I'm not interesting. The people that I tend to get angry with tend to be people that I really love. I'm pretty patient with people that I'm just have a casual relationship. It's usually the people that I feel really close to that will see me angry. So if you've seen me angry, means I like you. I feel close to you on some level. I don't usually I would never get angry with you, or at least show it, unless I felt attacked by you or I felt hurt by you. There's something that you did that hurt my feelings. And so a lot of the times I deal with that in anger. So how can I work with that emotion? So if I look at it, the purpose of anger is to help us rise up to deal with a threat. So how can I help myself deal with that threat? 1, understanding is an option. That's why a lot of the times understanding helps when I get to step 2, when I seek to understand my emotion. So much of the time, understanding helps me resolve anger. Anger is probably one of the most difficult emotions that I had to deal with, and is now one of the easier emotions that I have to deal with. I still get angry. I still get upset. I still have times when I snap, when I don't do my process. But when I do my process and I stop my emotion and then I seek to understand it, just understanding the threat usually helps me resolve that threat. Because once that threat is no longer scary, then the anger goes away. It doesn't have, its purpose has been solved. So just asking myself, do I actually need to protect myself from this thing? This person ignored me. Is that something that are they really a threat? Are they really trying to hurt me? Are they really trying to make me feel unimportant? No. And so once I start to realize that threat, that thing that's hurting me, is not actually something that I need to fight against, I'll usually just resolve it right there. The other thing is that I'll communicate with that person. If I have great communication and I communicate in a healthy way, what I'll do is I'll pause that anger and I'll go to this person and I say, you know what you just did, I felt this way. And the reason I felt this way is because I have an issue with XYZ. So a lot of the times I'll be vulnerable with somebody that's really close. So if I had somebody I was in an intimate relationship with, I would go to them and say, hey, just so you're aware, being interrupted or feeling ignored is a really big trigger for me. And I understand that's not completely your fault. There's a lot of that issue that has to do with me and my identity, and I'm working at getting better at that. But if you could do me a favor and try to not interrupt me, if I'm talking too long, I'm okay with you like putting your hand on my hand, or let's find some type of a sign that you can give me to help me recognize that I've lost track of how long I'm chatting for, because I can do that at times. I can digress and go down rabbit holes and go all over the place when it comes to communication. So if you could just work with me to help me feel like what I have to say is important, especially when I'm sharing something that's really vulnerable with you, then I will do my best in order to try to be more succinct with what I'm sharing and let you know when I have something that I really need to go through that's going to take a lot of time, and make sure that you're in a space where you can hear that. So that's how I deal with anger, is I just start to understand it, and then I help deal with this quote unquote threat, in this case, where I'm feeling like the threat is this person doesn't love me, or this person doesn't find me interesting, or this person feels I'm unimportant. Whatever it might be, I deal with that threat by communication. But there's other ways that you could possibly deal with anger. That's just a couple of examples of how I can work with the emotion instead of just repressing it or letting it all spew out all over the person that I'm talking to. Another example of an emotion and how you can work with it is stress. The purpose of stress, to my understanding, the way I look at it, is it helps us hyper-focus on a problem. If you think about stress, when you feel stressed out about something, all you can think about is that thing that you're stressed about. And what happens is that stress tends to go away when you either find a solution to the problem, or it resolves itself naturally, or something happens that takes away that threat from your life. So my belief is the way that we work with stress is we start talking to people and we start collaborating with people to find a strategy, or we start studying things to find a strategy, or we start taking action. Have you ever had a time, like let's say that you're struggling with money and you're feeling stressed about your finances. Even if you don't all of a sudden have money just come pouring in, just taking more action to create and generate money starts to make you feel better, because you've actually taken action to address that threat that is causing your nervous system to feel all riled up. So hopefully you can see how emotions, they have a purpose. Anger is there to help us fight against something and help us conquer it. Stress is there to help us hyper-focus on a problem. Sadness is there to help us grieve and deal with it. And then there's a grieving process, which I talked about last week. There's all these emotions, and they all have purposes. So all you have to do is start understanding why this emotion is there in my life and how can I work with it. Now, at the same time that you're working with that emotion, there's something else that I have found that you should do at the same time, simultaneously. While you're working with it, you're doing something else. And it's kind of interwoven with working with the emotion in a way that it made it really hard for me to figure out what order to talk to you about this. But the other thing that you're doing at the same time as working with your emotion is being a loving leader. And I'm saying that term because my friend Henry Amar uses it all the time. And when he first started using it, I felt like I kind of understood what he meant. And he kept using it, and I kind of kept understanding what he meant. And then finally one day, like 5 months after I first heard him use the term loving leader, it clicked. And I understood that for me, the way I look at loving leadership is it's being a parent of my inner child. Some people might dislike the term inner child, but just bear with me. What it is it's about giving myself what I need in each situation like I would with a child. And I'll expound on that. There are times when your child is dealing with a really strong, intense situation. The best thing you can do is love them, empathize with them, and wrap your arms around them. There's times when the best thing that you can do is be a rock. And you can say to that child, you know what? We've got this. It's going to be okay. We're going to be all right. Sometimes the best thing you can do for that child is to inspire them and give them a push and say, you know what? You can deal with this. I believe in you. Go take care of this. Sometimes the best thing you can do is to help them shift their focus. With my kids, I used to always do this thing. I still do all this thing. When they get really grumpy, I'll sing them really corny songs. My dad used to do this. And it's a great way to get them to laugh because they can't help but laugh at how silly I'm being. And it just kind of helps them shift their focus so that they're not thinking about the thing that's making them feel this big, grumpy, sad feeling. With us, it's the same way. A lot of the times with really intense emotions like grief and rejection and sadness, we need to give ourselves empathy. Sometimes when we're feeling down and depressed, and by the way, all of this is not medical advice. I should probably have a disclaimer that I give at the front of all of my podcasts, but I'm learning to do that. Sometimes with depression, what I need to do is I need to take action. Sometimes the best way to get me out of feeling down is to go do something about what's making me feel down. Sometimes I need to just help myself realize that I am not going to abandon myself. I am not going to continue to shift my behavior to the needs of everybody else around me and completely abandon myself. Because I have a tendency to do that. I have a tendency to people please and sacrifice myself for the needs of other people. And so I believe that my little inner Jared, at times he feels abandoned. He feels like he can't count on me. I think there's times where my little inner Jared feels he can't count on me because I don't show up for him. I don't do the things to take care of his finances. I don't do the things to take care of his needs in life. And I put everybody else first. So I think it can be a combination of all four of those things and even more. But the point is, think about yourself the same way you would a child. You look at that child and you look at that situation and you tailor what you do for them based on what you feel they need in that moment. And that's really what you need to do for yourself. When you're dealing with emotion, how can I come to myself with the most possible love that I can and show up for myself in the way that I really need? Do I need a rock? Do I need a leader? Do I need somebody that says, I've got this? Or do I need somebody that puts their arms around me? And then just give that to yourself. Sometimes when I'm shifting emotions, sometimes that is the best thing. Sometimes my emotions get so big that I need a reset. What I need to do is I need to reset myself and then come back and go through this process. I have found the best way for me to reset my emotions, or at least cause my emotions to be less big, is by shifting my focus. And what I'll do is I'll shift my focus by like listening to music, having a conversation with somebody, listening to an audiobook, reading a book. Taking a nap is almost always a really good way to reset. I mean, how many times have you gone to bed upset or something and you wake up and you feel better until you start thinking about the thing that made you upset or sad or stressed or whatever it might be? Sometimes for me, it's giving a speech. I'll just turn on an audio recording and start making up a speech off the top of my head. What I found is it really comes down to anything that engages your conscious mind enough that you're not able to focus on the thing that is feeding your emotion. So an action or an event is driving that emotion. And the more you focus on that action or event, the stronger that emotion is going to be. In essence, you feed that emotion. So by taking your mind off of that, that's the best way to do it. I've found that listening to music can help with less intense emotions. Really intense emotions, like if I'm really stressed or really angry or whatever, listening to music isn't going to do it for me. A conversation with somebody about a topic not related to what's feeding my emotion will do it for me. Because then I have to focus so completely on what I'm talking to that person about, I can't possibly be thinking about the thing that's feeding this emotion that I'm dealing with. So I'll go use that as a way to reset myself, so then that way I can come back to it and work with the emotion and show love and be the leader and all those things. And then the last thing that I found with emotional processing is feeling the emotion. I had such a long period of time where I thought that the best way to deal with an emotion was just to shift my focus. I used to only shift my focus, and then I would kind of be aware of it. I would understand it a little bit, and that was it. But I didn't understand how to work with emotions, and I didn't understand that sometimes the best way to deal with emotion is to just feel the emotion. Especially sadness and grief. I don't know how many times where I've had it that I just sit back and I cry, and I feel this desire to cry, and I just let it flow out of me. I do think emotions can become chronic, especially grief, depression can become chronic if we dwell on certain things too much. But there are a lot of times where the best thing I can do is just feel it. I don't know how many times I've been in my car and I've just cried about somebody that I miss or something that I've been through. The other thing is feeling the emotions that I may not actually feel. That may sound odd, but for me, a lot of the times when I feel rejected, I feel sadness and I feel hurt. But I don't feel anger. And what's interesting is I once had somebody tell me, they're like, you should feel angry about this. And so what I started doing is I would look at it and say, well, what emotions would it be reasonable or normal to feel in this situation? I'm like, it would be normal to be angry about this, and this. And I started thinking about it, and I realized I was angry about it. And so I've had times where I've just been in my car yelling at a situation, a person, something that somebody did, because I needed to let that out in a healthy way. In a car, yelling and expressing all your frustrations is okay. It's okay to be frustrated. Some people act like anger is this terrible, evil emotion. It's not. It can be if you do terrible, evil things with it. But it's okay to feel frustrated. It's okay to be upset about how somebody treated you or something somebody did. It's all right. So feel the emotions, and feel the emotions that maybe you're repressing. Because sometimes we block emotions without realizing it. I've had a couple of times where I've had really intense things happen in my life, and without realizing it, I kind of swallowed that emotion down. And then all of a sudden, a couple of days later, I started feeling just awful. And I realized it was because I never allowed myself to actually feel the emotion of the experience that I'd had. I just kind of repressed it and set it to the side. All right. So that's all the steps. I promised that I was going to simplify and bring this all together. It's actually just 4 easy steps. You stop or pause the emotion. You understand the emotion. Just ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? You actually feel the emotion, and then you don't repress it. And then the 4th thing is you give yourself what you need while working with the emotion to resolve it. So you do those 2 things simultaneously. You give yourself what you need in that emotion while working with it to resolve it. So if you stop, understand, feel, don't repress, and then work with it while you give yourself what you need, that's really all it is. I've got to the point now where I don't think about the process. I just do it. I just start doing it. And it's helped me through some of the most difficult times that I've experienced. I would say the time between May of 2022 and 2023 was the hardest 12 months of my entire life. But I have had some incredibly difficult emotional moments between, we'll say, December of 2023 and February of 2024. It's been so challenging. But the cool thing is I have handled it so much better than I did in the past because I've learned how to work with my emotions, because I've learned how to listen to myself and understand myself. I know that you can take these things and you can use them as well. When you seek to understand yourself and you show up for yourself, is when you're going to start feeling such a difference in your life. You know, I didn't talk about it today, but one of the things that I found that I do is I often have discussions with myself. I have discussions with myself, my subconscious mind. I will ask myself a question about how I'm feeling, about what I'm experiencing, and then just pause and listen. And between showing up for myself and seeking to understand myself, I feel like I have this relationship that is growing, this trust that is growing, that is allowing me to take myself and just enjoy the experience of being human. I don't ever shame myself about what I'm feeling. It's okay to have bad days. It's okay to have things not work out the right way. It's okay to have times where you don't show up for yourself. You are human. It is okay. You don't need to be perfect. So seek to understand yourself, work with yourself, and you'll have a better life. I hope this was helpful for some of you. And until next week, just remember that you are not alone.